My dear friends, here we are again. To continue our studies and practice of limitless love and compassion, practiced as both wisdom, understanding the open, all-pervading, luminous, empty nature of reality, and all phenomena, including ourselves, and including the suffering that we vow to liberate others from. And method, which is love and compassion. That is what method means in the Buddha Dharma and the Mahayana. So this is our second day of looking at how to dispel the obstacles that prevent us from realizing truth, just as it is, just as we are. So I'm very happy we have another day together. At the end of the first day, it feels always as if everything has been said and exchanged. And then in the second day, we get to go a little deeper. So I'm happy we have this second day together. Let's do our opening prayers. In our tradition, the Drikung Kagyu tradition, we have a unique opening prayer that begins our prayer cycles always. It's the first prayer we say. It comes before all the others, and it is placing before us in importance and urgency the enlightenment of all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. All mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. All mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. For that purpose, until I attain Buddhahood, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. Until death, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. From today until this time tomorrow, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. And consider for a moment the relative ease and difficulty of these three vows. From Buddhahood until Buddhahood, we say that we will engage in acts of body, speech, and mind that are virtuous, and what that means is beneficial to beings. It's relatively, it's staggering to think of us doing that until Buddhahood, but Buddhahood, we imagine, is fairly far off. So there's a certain ease in making that commitment. And then we bring it a little closer until death, meaning until this life is over. I will use this entire lifetime and all its moments to apply body, speech, and mind to virtue. That heats it up a little bit. Now we're more focused. We're talking about now in some, in distant future, we're going to die. We don't even know if it's distant, but we know we're going to die. So it becomes a little closer. The horizon is now a little closer. It's no longer Buddhahood, it's my own death. And then comes the hardest part. Easy to say, incomprehensible in some ways to imagine that literally from today until this time tomorrow, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. And if you've spent any time meditating on the cushion, you know that literally from instant to instant, this body, speech, and mind can deviate from that beautiful intention, and then it can be drawn back again. So this is really a very trenchant, significant prayer and statement of intention. I encourage you to really contemplate it and what it means for you to make these 3 vows every day. Thank you. And then the Prayer of Refuge. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhicitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhicitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhicitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. It may be, and indeed perhaps has been, that Buddhas may spring intact in the original state. For most of us, we will generate bodhicitta and progress along the stages of the Bodhisattva's path, just as the Buddhas of the past have done. And what this means is the path is still warm. We're walking in the footsteps of beings, some of whom we know in this lifetime, who are on this path ahead of us, and who are definitely approaching Buddhahood, if not already having attained. And we know many, many bodhisattvas, great and small. The path is still warm for us. It is still radiant with the warmth of their footsteps. And I invite each one of us who has the aspiration to attain enlightenment, to liberate all beings, to recognize that our footsteps on the path are just as important for those who follow us as the footsteps of those who precede us, and in the warmth of which we now travel the path. We may not think of ourselves as great bodhisattvas approaching Buddhahood, but if we don't think of ourselves that way, why are we sitting here together? Why are we studying the Buddha Dharma? Why are we receiving and studying and contemplating the teachings of the great masters, male and female, and in between, who have given us their wisdom, not in order to entertain, but in order to attain? So when you place your foot down on the path by sitting on your cushion, by picking up your text, by contemplating what you've been studying, by practicing the glorious sadhana that is in your hands, and approaching the deity with devotion, beseeching the deity, please, I beseech you to accept me as a pure offering. Right? In each of these commitments of self, we lose some self, which is excellent, and we gain some insight, we gain some courage, we gain some encouragement. Please remember that as you place your foot one step after the other on the Bodhisattva path, you are keeping open the path for the one who might be right behind you, or maybe a lifetime behind you, but who might hear about you perhaps from a relative, perhaps from a student of yours, perhaps from something you've left behind, a work of art, perhaps a dance form, perhaps a piece of writing, perhaps a painting, perhaps a song. These are your steps that are radiant and warm for others. Please, as you walk the path, remember this. You're not the last person. For some, you may be the first. And then we have the prayer called the Four Immeasurables, I touched on yesterday, explaining that even though in the prayer, equanimity comes last, in our training, equanimity really needs to come first. We generate the aspiration for ultimate love and compassion to completely flower in our mind stream, our heart, our consciousness, and ultimately to open the door to ultimate wisdom. And we are like turtles in the shell of self-grasping. Little head coming out from time to time, peering around, and then withdrawing. Let's go all the way out, leave the shell behind. And we're doing it for others. I call this the Bodhisattvas Prayer. If there's no other prayer that you ever recite day to day, and yesterday Zachary, or one of our friends, said, how do I generate love and compassion? How do I generate bodhicitta? All that we're talking about is how. These are the hows. And this prayer is, it is vast. We're talking about sentient beings limitless as space. It is profound. We're talking about the end of suffering and all its causes. And it's joyous. We're calling forth the ultimate joy, the happiness that is free from sorrow, because it is really free. And we're calling for the liberation of our friends, in whatever form we may meet them, to be free from attachment and aversion. In other words, to experience what we can call holy equanimity, whether it's a crisis of equanimity at some point or not. Let's call it a holy state, because it really allows us to recognize the holiness, the wholeness of all, ourselves included. So this recitation, I warmly impress upon us all that every day we recite this prayer of the Four Immeasurables. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as space, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they not be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. The supplication to the Guru. I'm moving us very slowly through these few opening prayers this morning. Often we trot through them or gallop through them in a manner that's speedy, and that's fine when you already have them in your heart as seeds that are really unfolding and that you're aware of. When they're relatively new for you, it's good to understand something of the meaning and how the meaning of the prayers encapsulates what we are studying for, what we're contemplating, and what we are bringing to fruition through our practice. So that's why slowing down this morning to spend time here with these prayers. Namo, to the Guru, the utter purity of all appearance and existence, I offer all appearance and existence, arisen as the primordial ground, meaning recognizing all appearance and existence as inseparable from the pure ground of reality as it is, which is limitless, profound, vast, all-pervading, luminous, and empty. I supplicate you, may the three realms be completely liberated. Please grant blessings to empty samsara from its depths. Lord, with 5 omniscient wisdoms, that refers to the wisdoms of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, crown ornament, kind one with loving nature, precious protector of beings, heart of all Buddhas, inexpressible by words or thought, I supplicate you from the core of my mind. And here is the supplication. Bless me from within the state of Dharmata, the sphere of reality. Bless me to realize this mind, primordially pure and unborn, as the unfathomable Dharmakaya, the ultimate state. Please turn the wheel of the Dharma, of the greater and lesser vehicles and the teachings common to both, according to the dispositions and mental capacities of sentient beings. And then the 37 Bodhisattva practices, which our Lama is always kindly reminding us, contains the entire Buddha Dharma. If you don't have a version of this, you can request the small booklet from the Garchen Institute bookstore, I think. Is that correct? Yes. And then in every commentary on the 37 Bodhisattva practices, the root text will also appear. And each has a slightly different translation, which is very interesting and actually very good for our minds to see the same text, same root text, translated a little differently in each case, because it gives us slightly different and subtly different angles of view on the meaning, and in ways that we can approach it become really very available when you realize there's more than one way to say something, and one translation might suit your mind better one day, and another one the next might wake you up and you'd say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. So it's very good to read many different translations. So here's Rinpoche's introduction to this text that he gives to everyone. He says, as you have been my parents, I love you. To those who love me, I wish to give something that is like my own heart. The twofold bodhicitta, meaning the relative bodhicitta and the ultimate bodhicitta, which is also the heart of the Buddhas of the 3 times. As this book explains the 2 types of bodhicitta, please read it every day. Namo Lokeshvaraya. While seeing that Lokeshvaraya is one of the names for the Buddha of compassion. So we're really saluting, paying homage to compassion by saluting first Lokeshvaraya. While seeing that all phenomena neither come nor go, you strive solely for the sake of all beings. Supreme Guru and Protector Chenrezig, at all times I respectfully pay homage to you with my body, speech, and mind. The perfect Buddhas, source of all benefit and happiness, arise from having accomplished the true Dharma. Since that depends on knowing the practices, I shall explain the way of the Bodhisattvas. Having now gained this great ship of freedom and fortune so difficult to find, in order to free yourself and others from the ocean of cyclic existence, listen, reflect, and meditate day and night without distraction. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Attachment to loved ones churns like water. Hatred for enemies rages like fire. In the darkness of ignorance, one forgets what to adopt and what to avoid. Abandon your homeland. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When negative places are abandoned, disturbing emotions will gradually decline. Without distractions, attention to virtue naturally grows. When the mind becomes clear, certainty in the Dharma arises. Live alone in seclusion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Family and long-time companions will part from each other. Possessions gained with effort will be left behind. Consciousness, a guest, will leave the guest house of the body. Let go of all worldly concerns. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In bad company, the three poisons grow stronger. The activities of learning, reflecting, and meditating decline, and love and compassion are lost. Give up such companions. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When one follows a true spiritual friend, faults will dissolve and good qualities will grow like the waxing moon. Consider this friend more dear than your own body. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Who can worldly gods, themselves also prisoned in samsara, protect? Therefore seek refuge in the three jewels, the undeceiving source of refuge. This is the way of a bodhisattva. The Buddha taught that all the unbearable suffering of the lower realms is caused by wrongdoing. Therefore never act wrongfully, even at the cost of your life. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Wrongfully here means never cause suffering to beings. Like a dewdrop on a blade of grass, the happiness of the three worlds vanishes in but an instant. Strive for the supreme state of never-changing liberation. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When mothers who've loved you since beginningless time are suffering, what good is your own happiness? Therefore give rise to bodhicitta in order to liberate infinite sentient beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. All suffering, without exception, comes from seeking your own happiness. The perfect Buddhas are born from the altruistic mind. Therefore, truly exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone driven by great desire steals all your wealth or lets others steal it, dedicating to them your body, possessions, and all virtues of the three times, this is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone cuts off your head when you haven't done anything wrong, take all their negative deeds upon yourself through the power of compassion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if others slander you throughout a billion worlds, in return speak with a loving mind of their good qualities. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone exposes your hidden faults and insults you in front of others, view that person as a teacher and bow with respect. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone you've cared for as dearly as your own child regards you as an enemy, love that person even more as a mother would her ailing child. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone of equal or lower status, driven by pride, treats you with disdain, respectfully place them on your crown as your teacher. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Though you may be impoverished, always disparaged, gripped by disease and tormented by spirits, never lose courage, but take on the misdeeds and pains of all beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Though you may be famous and revered by many and are as rich as the wealth god himself, having seen that worldly fortune is without essence, do not be proud. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If the enemy, your own anger, is not tamed, subduing outer enemies will only make them increase. Therefore, subdue your own mind with the army of love and compassion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Sensory pleasures are like salt water. The more you drink, the greater your thirst. Abandon at once all things that give rise to clinging attachment. This is the way of a bodhisattva. The way things appear is your own mind. Mind itself primordially transcends fabricated extremes. Knowing just this, do not create concepts of subject and object. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When you come across things that attract you, like beautiful rainbows in summertime, do not regard them as real and abandon clinging attachment. This is the way of a bodhisattva. All suffering is like the death of your child in a dream. How exhausting it is to hold illusory appearances as real. Therefore, when you meet with difficult circumstances, see them as illusory. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When even one's body must be given up when aspiring for enlightenment, what need is there to mention material things? Therefore, practice generosity without hope of reward or karmic results. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If you lack moral discipline, you cannot accomplish even your own purpose, so wanting to achieve the purpose of others is truly absurd. Therefore, protect your discipline without concern for worldly existence. This is the way of a bodhisattva. For bodhisattvas who desire a wealth of virtue, all harm is like a precious treasure. Therefore, without hostility, be patient with everyone. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even hearers or solitary realizers who accomplish only their own purpose strive as if putting out a fire on their head. Seeing this, practice with diligence the source of good qualities for the sake of all beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Disturbing emotions are destroyed by insight grounded in calm abiding. Knowing this, cultivate meditative concentration that purely transcends the four formless absorptions. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Without wisdom, the other five perfections alone are not enough to reach complete enlightenment. Thus, combined with skillful means, develop the wisdom that does not distinguish among the three spheres. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Unless you examine your own confused ideas, you might not look like a practitioner. You might look like a practitioner, but not be acting like one. Therefore, always examine yourself and abandon confusion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If you are driven by disturbing emotions and talk about another bodhisattva's faults, it's actually to your own detriment. So don't mention the faults of those who've entered the great vehicle. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Concern for gain and respect causes conflict and a decline in the activities of learning, reflecting, and meditating. So abandon attachment to your circle of friends, relations, and benefactors. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Harsh words disturb others' minds and thus diminish the practice of a bodhisattva. Therefore, abandon harsh speech, which is unpleasant to others. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When disturbing emotions become habitual, it is difficult to reverse them with antidotes. Thus, the soldier of mindfulness wields antidotes as weapons and destroys disturbing emotions such as attachment the moment they start to arise. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In brief, wherever you are and whatever you are doing, always examine the state of your mind. Act to accomplish the purpose of others through constant mindfulness and awareness. This is the way of a bodhisattva. With the wisdom of threefold purity, dedicate all the virtue gained from having made such effort toward enlightenment. Dedicate it to clear away the suffering of infinite beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. There are very, very, very many excellent and profound commentaries on the 37 Bodhisattva practices. Currently, Khenpo Tenzin here at our Dharma Center is giving an online course in the 37 Bodhisattva practices. Garchen Rinpoche gives commentary frequently on individual practices or the entire text. He's given a number of times. I think in every tradition of in all the schools of the Tibetan tradition of Vajrayana, I think in every school there are commentaries that the masters in that school have provided. I encourage you to look out for the commentaries that people whom you know, who have studied this material might recommend, the ones that they have found really beneficial. Go online and look at reviews of the different commentaries by the great masters and also contemporary masters. And it's just, every commentary is its own special self-contained teaching of the whole Buddha Dharma. So you can't lose by reading a number of commentaries. So I welcome you to the few, perhaps, actually, relatively speaking, of the numbers of sentient beings that exist, the few who have this doorway open to really deeply, deeply understand the core teachings, the essence teachings of the Buddha Dharma, which all have their roots deep, deep, deep in bodhicitta, which is what we're working with. Let's do the Shanti Deva prayer for the end of all illness in the light of that brief commentary. And really place this prayer in your heart as you enunciate it. I know many of us have memorized it because we've done it a lot. I always like to read it at least once first, so to be sure I'm getting it exactly as it is, because, as I mentioned yesterday, people all over the world are making the commitment to do this prayer 3 times, morning and evening. That's Rinpoche's request to us, so I pass it to you. And if you need the text, it is on page, what's the page in the... I just don't see right here the little card I usually keep. It has the page number on it.
It's 64, number 21.
64?
Yep.
In the blue prayer book. But we can also put the text up on the screen for you. I wish I'd thought of that a little sooner. That would have been helpful. But I think that would be a good idea. Is that something can be done swiftly enough? And then if you want to, you can simply take notes as we recite it, and then you'll have it also. I thought you'd maybe just take a picture of it. This is a grown man. This is not a teenager. He has the fastest thumbs I've ever seen on the little keyboard of his phone or a computer. I'll tell you what, I'm going to start the recitation, and the text will go up as I'm reciting. Many of you already know the prayer. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed. Note that this doesn't use the word human once. This is every being, not just humans. And I think that completes the opening prayers, unless I've forgotten something. The topic for our day is in the as the topic was yesterday. It's cultivating limitless love and compassion. The subtitle yesterday was just abandon like and dislike, and everything becomes perfectly clear. That was the lead-in to study of equanimity, practice of equanimity. And today the subtitle is no self, no other. I spoke yesterday about Tonglen a little bit. Tonglen usually is translated in what I've read as giving and taking, meaning giving, taking the suffering of others and giving others your happiness. And there are probably as many ways of doing Tonglen as there are people who have received the practice and make it their own to practice day in and day out with every breath, or when they are able to, on the cushion in a formal way. On the cushion is our shorthand for a formal practice. Doesn't necessarily mean you're on a cushion. It might mean you're sitting on a tree stump somewhere. but you're doing an actual formal practice, meaning you have an intention and you sit down and you fulfill the intention and then you get up again. The other form of practice, the other kind of practice that we refer to often is between sessions, or off the cushion, meaning in the course of your ordinary life, you're practicing all the time. Or in intervals in the ordinary life, you can be practicing whatever it is that you've received that is meaningful to you to practice. So when I said that we'd be looking at Tonglen today, I wasn't referring specifically to a practice in which you sit down and do the practice that rides astride the breath of, on the in-breath you take the suffering of another, and on the out-breath you give ultimate happiness and joy to that other person or being or situation. You can also practice Tonglen for beings who have died years and years ago. It doesn't have to be for somebody, for example, who's presently alive, or somebody you know, or somebody you've even heard the name of. You can practice for a whole situation, like you can practice for the Holocaust, for the perpetrators and the victims and the bystanders and the witnesses of the Holocaust. You can take all of that suffering and return the most profound sources of happiness that you have had access to, and return that in abundance. So we're not going to spend a lot of time doing an actual structured Tonglen practice. You can find that in from many sources. An excellent source is Pema Chodron, a wonderful American nun in the Tibetan tradition, who gives a number of different versions of Tonglen. I myself do a lot of what I call Tonglen on the fly, which means in any circumstance at any moment, with one breath in and one breath out, you can be taking the suffering of one and returning your true experience, or direct experience of love, of freedoms from suffering, of wisdom. What we're really returning is bodhicitta. We're really returning on the out-breath bodhicitta. That is the source of Buddhahood, so it is certainly the source of temporal happiness as well, right? And sometimes people have an anxiety when they hear descriptions of Tonglen that say, you're taking the suffering of others. You're not taking it on. In other words, you're not taking it on as the person has cancer, now you're going to take their cancer. That's not what we mean by Tonglen. And there may be great beings who can do that, but that's not what we're practicing. We are taking the suffering and we're taking it into our heart, in which burns the inviolable, indestructible flame of bodhicitta. So we are taking the suffering of beings into the bodhicitta that is in our own heart, and we are sending out that exact same bodhicitta on the out-breath as the cure for all suffering. It's the cure for all suffering. Why? Because in bodhicitta, there is no separation of self and other. So there is no self-grasping. Where there's no self-grasping, there is no suffering. Where there's no self-grasping, there is no samsaric existence. So this is the key for us to understand, so we don't get all confused and caught up and anxious and thinking, well, that person has COVID-19, I'm not going to practice Tonglen for my friend who has COVID because, then I will possibly get very, very sick and maybe die. This is an understandable reaction because we live in the framework of materiality. We're, in fact, deeply, deeply confused by materiality. we live in a world that we apprehend through our sense faculties, and they are body-based. So you can see me smiling as I talk about this, because I love dispelling this confusion, and I trust that these words are helping to dispel this confusion, because here in the practice of giving and taking, we're confronted with our own material attachment to the other that we think we're practicing for, to ourselves being the practitioner, we think, and to suffering, which we think is the bad thing that we want to take away, and to the resolution of suffering, meaning we're giving happiness because you can, if somebody's homeless, for example, you can take away the homelessness in your mind, in your intention. You can relieve that suffering by taking away the condition of homelessness, and you can actually visualize houses, homes being showered down upon all those great populations who wander the globe with no shelter. This is not just, Skid Row, New York City we're talking about. We're talking about beings. There are oceans of children unaccompanied wandering the world. And that's not just our southern border that, we hear about in our newspapers. I've seen this in Africa, for example, unaccompanied children, homeless and parentless because of war and famine and fear. They're just wandering from one place to another, and they have no shelter. So certainly practicing Tonglen with all the children unaccompanied, alone, unprotected, and unsheltered, and starving and thirsty and sick, you can take that whole suffering in your mind. You can bring it into the bodhicitta in your own heart. This is effortless. This is just breathing. You have no thought of I, no attachment to I am doing something for others. Just there is bodhicitta generated in your heart, even if it's just the thought of vast compassion and love. Maybe you haven't got a feeling yet for the vast and limitless compassion and love, but maybe it's just the intention. And you hear about these children, perhaps for the first time in this moment, from me perhaps, that there are children wandering the globe unaccompanied and unsheltered. And your heart, it responds to that and said, I don't want them to suffer like that. So in that instant, you just took some of that suffering into the heart of love and compassion, bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta, which is in your heart because ultimate bodhicitta is your nature. It's your true nature. We're not going out to a store to buy bodhicitta and then build on it. It's already here, ultimate bodhicitta, and so we practice the practices of relative bodhicitta so that we really sweep away, blow away, love away all that obscures the ultimate within. So all the unaccompanied children are now on a path into the bodhicitta in my heart and yours. Just thousands, millions of these children. But there's no solidity to this person, so there's no burden being placed in my heart that these children are sweeping in. There's only the joy of welcoming the suffering into the bodhicitta. I'm welcoming the suffering into the bodhicitta. And then on the out-breath, feeling that place of suffering in an individual's mind and heart, or in some actual place on the planet, just filling it with the illumination, the radiance, and the warmth of unconditional, unconditioned, completely selfless, infinite love and compassion. In the way we use it in the Buddha Dharma, compassion means desiring that another being not suffer. Now we're easily touched by the suffering of others. Many times we have had some passing thought about that. You know, this practice allows it to not be a passing thought. It allows it to become an intention that we will hold the suffering of others in the compassion of bodhicitta. And in the way we use it in the Buddha Dharma, the word love means desiring that others have happiness. You know? Now that's a little bit, I mean, that's easy to wish that somebody could be happy, but we run into a little trouble in the practice of love, wishing others happiness sometimes, because sometimes there are people we don't like very much, and maybe they've harmed us. And it's a little harder. We might have compassion for their suffering out of which they've behaved badly. That's relatively easy to do once the mind starts to wake up. But it's a little harder to wish that somebody who's harmed you would have complete, profound, limitless happiness. So here's, now the heart is not just touched, the heart is now expanding its capacity to recognize suffering of another as the gift that we receive that allows us to return good for ill, perhaps, or simply to give from a flowing abundance of love that we experience, or even if we're not experiencing it, that we know exists. We know that absolute love exists. How do we know it? Because we're experiencing relative love. Absolute love and compassion exist. The reflection is in our own direct experience. We're not necessarily experiencing the absolute directly, but we are experiencing compassion and love at whatever level and in whatever circumstance that arises for us. That's the demonstration of the teaching that the original nature, love, compassion, bodhicitta, is our original nature. If you remember nothing else from this weekend, please remember that. All the beauteous qualities that you see in this or that person or this or that circumstance or experience, they are all reflections of the primordial perfection that is. They're like refractions more than reflections. You know how crystal hangs in the window, and as it moves in a little bit of a breeze, you see one, fully saturated color after another flashing in the light. That's a wonderful image for me of the nature of reality. The crystal doesn't have those light qualities in it. I mean, the crystal is clear, absolutely clear quartz crystal, like this one here. Perfect clarity. But when light hits it in a certain way, and I'm not a scientist, so I can't describe what refraction actually is, but we've seen this, so we know this happens. At a certain angle, the light refraction comes back to us, to our vision, as a perfection of color, just a colored light. Like in the deity practices that we do in our practice tradition, the Vajrayana, there's images frequently of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas sending out rays of radiance as rays of light. Then as they go out, and they may be of different colors depending on the nature of the practice, so as they go out, they touch every sentient being. This is part of the deity practice normally. And they touch every sentient being, and the touch of that light completely purifies that being of all confusion, all ignorance, all suffering. and that being is instantly then transformed into a bodhisattva or a Buddha. So you can think of yourself that way. The practice of Tonglen for you, as you take in the suffering of the being or beings into bodhicitta, to that unquenchable light, and then on the out breath, you could imagine that the absolute goodness, the absolute happiness, the absolute wisdom, the absolute joy are out on the light rays they go. Irresistibly. Truth is irresistible. That means literally it cannot be resisted because it is what we are innately. So there are many renditions of Tonglen practice that you can read about and practice. And you will also find your own ways to practice Tonglen. I want to emphasize that at the beginning for Tonglen practitioners, it's really very, very important and helpful to recognize yourself as transparent and insubstantial, meaning having no substantiality. You are not a solid form. You are in, for example, the body of one of the deities that you practice or that you've seen pictures of, or you can imagine yourself as a being of light, like a rainbow, very vivid, very vivid. You have color and form and so on, but you're completely without any substance, radiant and insubstantial. So imagine yourself that way, translucent completely, so that there's no, you're not in any way thinking that you, a human person, are taking the suffering of another human person and transforming it by some magical thing. You and the object of your practice, the person that you practice, say the person or situation, are without substantiality. What we're working with here is the suffering. And it too is insubstantial. The suffering is insubstantial. It has no solidity. So you can imagine the suffering coming to you also as a quality of light, for example, as a smoky light, for example, if you wear some heaviness, or a light that one doesn't see perhaps so clearly, not like the light that flashes off a crystal face. So we want to really acknowledge in ourselves and give ourselves the space to recognize in our actual ways of practice that we are not solid. We're not solid. We are being and becoming, changing in every instant. We're made up of the elements of life. We're products of our experience. Our minds are deeply imbued with idealism and aspiration and hope. We also are deeply burdened by and then ultimately freed by karmic traces, the imprints on our minds from our own actions of body, speech, and mind that were unskillful or harmful or negative in some way. And some have been positive. Karma is both positive and negative. The ones that are burdensome for us are the negative karmic seeds that we've laid down in our own mind stream that will come to fruition when conditions make that possible. And that is their purification. We talked about this yesterday in response to some questions, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And the purification happens naturally for karma. Purification, I'm going to just take a sip of tea here, and then I want to speak a little bit about what purification means for us, because the word can have some connotations that can add to some confusion. So let me just refresh my mouth here. The original state is primordially pure. What that means is we are primordially pure. In the absolute, our nature is stainless and unstained. Our true nature is in no way blemished, in no way corrupted, in no way crippled, in no way harmed by anything. It is unborn and undying. We, who we truly are, what we truly are, unborn and undying, uncreated, always, already present and complete and holy, meaning sacred, meaning perfect, pure, unsullied, unstainable, unchanging, unchangeable. All the things that arise in our minds, all the things that arise in the world, that look as if they've just caused harm that just hurts even to think about. It's like a bird flying across the sky, leaving no trace. We, as beings who live in existential reality, we live in existential reality because of self-grasping, because of this original error of perception and attribution, the original error of consciousness recognizing it exists, that being exists, and grasping to selfness, and then perpetrating the thought of otherness immediately. So instantly there's love and hate, war and peace, good, bad, this, that. That's what's being referred to in verse 22 of the 37 practices. Do not create concepts of subject and object. That's the way of a bodhisattva. But we do that because we have attachment to self, and it's not just attachment, actually. It is, the grasping is constant, unremitting, mostly unconscious. We're conscious sometimes of being selfish. We're conscious of being self-centered. We may be conscious of what I call self-reference, meaning the little nugget of self that we're seeking to. Let me rephrase that. For example, in talking about equanimity yesterday, I spoke about self-reference. I said, even if love is not limitless, it's still good. And there's still some self-grasping in it if it's not completely unconditional, completely pure, completely limitless. So that self-grasping is experienced in some ways by self-reference. We can see when we look at our minds if there's a thought of self anywhere going on. We can see that. And part of the discipline of meditative practice is to see that. It's not to jump into a peaceful state. It's to see that which is arising, that is definitely the self that is grasping at its own existence and identity, and that all of our actions of body, speech, and mind are conditioned by that self-grasping. So I sort of went off on a side route there for a minute. What I really want to be talking about with you right now is purification. So the original nature, which we have never strayed from, actually, it's always still there and intact, can't be harmed, can't be sullied. The original nature is what we refer to as primordial purity, that from the beginningless, we beings that are so obviously fault-ridden have been faultless, pure, pure, pure. And that state is present within us forever, inalienable, and our practice is to discover that. So what we refer to as the process of purification, it's not like taking a greasy pot and trying to scrub it clean. It was never dirty to begin with. Our pot, us, we were never dirty to begin with. So what the practice of purification means, we're sweeping away literally by our practice, by our aspiration, which we translate into intention, and then we translate into action. But we are sweeping away that which prevents us from seeing what already is. That's what we mean by purification. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. There never was, and there never will be something wrong with us in the absolute. In the relative, yeah. I could make a list, an endless list of things that I would say at one time or another have been wrong with my view, my action, my speech, and the results thereof. But I don't go there very often anymore. It's not as interesting to me as truth. I'm intimate with error. I've looked at it a lot. I've committed, well, we won't go there. I've committed a lot of error, as everybody has. I've made errors of perception and attribution and action. But that original error of misperception, of thinking that there is a solid, existing, self-existing person, thing here, that is, as I've said before, maybe some of you have been present and maybe others not, that original error, please listen closely here, please. Let your eyes and mind be really together, our hearts really together when I tell you this. It's really important that you understand this. That original error of grasping to the notion of a self is an entirely innocent error. It is completely innocent. There was no ill intention. There wasn't even yet a consciousness that formed intention. There was no impulse to harm. The harm only started when we started practicing the self-grasping that arose out of the completely innocent error of experiencing in the consciousness, experiencing existence, and thinking the thought forms of self. And then attributing, the attributional error is attributing, therefore, to the perceived other some quality of some negative quality because it's confusing, it's unknown, it's not understood. And we sentient beings, when confronted with what is completely new, will often respond with an attribution to that experience or object or being of possible harm. It's not even hatred at that stage. It's just a perception, completely innocent, of this might be harmful. This is not me. Don't know what it is. Might be harmful. I feel afraid. I feel doubt. And we can recognize this in our own experience day to day, over and over and over again. It's not a fault to have that original misperception, But for us, it becomes a fault to cling to it now that we know it's false. And so when we see it in our minds functioning, when we recognize some impulse of self-grasping, some pushing away of the identified other, or some shrinking in fear from something which very often produces a reaction of resistance or anger or wanting to destroy that which arouses in us doubt or fear. When we see that, it is a fault to follow the destructive impulse. We don't need to destroy the other. We need to stand steady in knowing, as beings in relative reality, where we are experiencing a self and we live with that as a part of our having a body, and that's not a fault to have that. It is a fault to place that first in importance. Yes, we need a roof. Yes, we need a floor. Yes, we need food. We need water. We need touch. We need warmth in the cold. We need cool in the heat. We need shelter. We need certain things to survive. But we don't need to destroy others in order to have a sense of ourselves as being viable and okay and good and holy. The existence of the other is not a threat to the existence of the self that we are always seeking to protect. I mean, there is enmity, there is war, but those are actions that beings are taking against each other. In fact, if I was thinking the other day, if there are beings who observe the earth and the way humans act towards each other, and if they have clear perception of things without the confusions of mind that we have, I don't know how they could not think that we are really intending to destroy ourselves. There's so much hatred that we attach to the image of the other. And so I don't want to get into talking about war and warlike actions particularly, but I want to be clear that I'm not saying that there isn't danger to us from other beings. There is. I mean, tigers eat people as well as human enemies hurt people. But what's the danger to us ultimately is not that we lose a body. The danger to us ultimately is that we lose or give away our bodhicitta. We lose bodies all the time. We've lived countless lifetimes, and on the path we will continue to live and lose countless lifetimes, countless bodies. That's normal, that's expected. We're born, we're made of something, therefore we will come apart, and that will happen. But for a human being, actually it doesn't have to be a human being, a bodhisattva can take any form that's beneficial to beings. For a human being to generate bodhicitta, at that moment that the bodhicitta fires up in your heart, mind, at the moment that you generate that, what we call the enlightenment thought, which is bodhicitta, to attain liberation in order to liberate all, at that instant, it becomes your most precious possession and must be protected above all things. Your children, of course, first, right? But I'm not talking about relative reality. Yes, there are hierarchies of what has to be protected first. But in you, more precious than your life is your bodhicitta. Place it first. Yes, protect your child first, or those who depend upon you. Yes, that is bodhicitta, to do that. That's not endangering your bodhicitta. So purification I touched on. The preciousness of bodhicitta we're touching on over and over again in these 2 days. I think we should probably take a break now. I've spoken for an extended period. And when we come back, I'd like to, I want to share with you, those of you who haven't seen it, and those who have seen it, I will speak a bit about it, and perhaps we'll understand it together, considering together more deeply. The Tonglen practice that Rinpoche has shared with us from his root lama, whom I spoke about yesterday, Khenpo Munsel, whom he met in the Chinese labor camp, where he was for 20 years, and Khenpo Munsel was there for a very long time also. He received a clear awareness practice from Khenpo Munsel. I mentioned that yesterday, and how Rinpoche, when he received that practice, he said that was what changed his life. Before that, he was a being who was suffering from great anger and sorrow and confusion, and after he began practicing clear awareness, he was no longer in that condition of mind. So Khenpo Munsel also bestowed upon Garchen Rinpoche the practice of Tonglen in a particular way that Rinpoche has said he has never seen anywhere else, and he has made it available to us. He made it available first, I think. Maybe he might have done it before as well, but the first we became aware of it was when he was in Milarepa's cave in Tibet, and Labchi Snow Mountain, and he enunciated the teaching on this form of Tonglen at that time, and we have those words recorded, and so therefore we have them in print. They are in, I think they're among the documents that I placed on the website for you to download. So if you go to the website in our break, if you haven't downloaded it yet, I think it's called A Teaching on Tonglen by Garchen Rinpoche, by His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche. It'll be very identifiable. The word Tonglen will be in the title. So please download it. It will be very valuable to you forever. Okay? And I want to say how it is that we have these words available to us. The person who recorded them is the person who is presently the director of the Garchen Institute. And she has been for many years a disciple of His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche. She's also a highly recognized videographer who's done many Buddhist documentary videos that are wonderful. I remember one in particular about her own spiritual journey, which touched me very much. But she's the videographer who created this extraordinary film about Rinpoche's life, which is called For the Benefit of All Beings. And it is available online now. It's available, it used to be available just as what do we used to call these, DVDs? Now it's actually available for download online. I think, is it on the website, Billy? Is there a link? There's a link, and so you'll see. Just there isn't a search button on the website, I don't think, but just keep scrolling. You know how it is when we scroll on the websites. We have to keep on going. You'll find a link to the video, and if you haven't seen it yet, this is something that you do not want to leave this body without having seen. Anyway, so to go back to. So Christina Lundberg is the name of the person who created this extraordinary film about Rinpoche, and she was with Rinpoche in Milarepa's cave on Labchi Snow Mountain in Tibet. She had an assistant at the time too, but she was carrying up these mountainsides her heavy video equipment, and there was more than one person could carry, so her assistant was also carrying. But she was, the sacrifices, Rinpoche chastised me with her sacrifices at one point, and I'm so grateful that he did so. I was kind of, I'm not going to go into what I was doing with my mind, but he he nailed me and said, I think maybe I was saying something doubtful or something, and he nailed me, as he so, thank heavens, he does from time to time, and pointed out how it is that we have access to his words that were spoken at that time, and there were many, and many of them are in the film, and others are in our archive and will be available or are available. So Christina Lundberg is the person by whose kindness we have this Tonglen practice that is unique to Khenpo Munsel's transmission. And we have it because Khenpo Munsel transmitted it to Garchen Rinpoche, and Garchen Rinpoche transmitted it to the people who were gathered with him in the cave that day, and Christina Lundberg recorded it. And so we have those actual spoken words. This is what's called, in our tradition, a short lineage of practice. The person from whom it originated, Khenpo Munsel, passed it to our guru, Garchen Rinpoche, and he passed it to us. That's only 3 steps. Many of our practices are from centuries ago. This one is immediate. So this is a great treasure. So please do download it, and when we come back, I'll introduce it to you, okay? I realize this presentation this morning is a bit discursive, but it is it's very focused in its intention. So I trust that it's not leaving you just sort of wondering, well, what is she talking about? I'm talking about truth and love. That's all I talk about, at least in the temple. I sometimes go on about other things. I would like to give you the reading transmission for this practice, Tonglen, that Rinpoche received from Khenpo Munsel and has kindly passed to us. Tonglen, a teaching by His Eminence Garchen Triptrul Rinpoche, Kathmandu, Nepal, 2007. The main practice I did in prison was Tonglen, giving and taking. Khenpo Munsel gave me many special oral instructions on Tonglen that were not in the text. In Tonglen, we generally say that we are sending happiness out to others and taking others' suffering in. But for the actual meaning of Tonglen, you have to understand the inseparability of self and others and other. The ground of our minds is the same. We understand this from the view. In this context, even if there are many different types of suffering, there is really only one thing called suffering. There is only one suffering, he taught. If there is only one suffering, then at this time, when you yourself have great suffering, you should think, the minds of the sentient beings of the three realms and my mind have the same ground. However, the essence of the suffering of the sentient beings of the three realms and your own suffering is the same. If you see them as the same, if you see them as being non-dual, and then meditate on that suffering in the mind's natural state, that suffering goes away. At that moment, you have been able to lessen the suffering of all sentient beings of the three realms all at once. The len of Tonglen means taking. First taken this way. Tong means giving. If you understand mind's nature, then you recognize the essence of whatever suffering and afflictive emotions there may be to be emptiness. When suffering does not harm you anymore, the mind has great bliss. If at that time you meditate, making self and others inseparable, then that bliss can diminish the self-grasping of all sentient beings. It can lessen the self-grasping. The happiness that is being given is the bliss that comes from the practice of giving and taking. This is how you should practice. This is very special. Others do not explain it in this way. So I'll make a few comments on the text. And I also will mention that this afternoon will be in both the live stream and Zoom for the entire afternoon. And there will be an opportunity, if you have questions about this practice, the way it's given here, you can raise those questions then. Perhaps I'll be able to anticipate some of them in the brief comments that I will make on the text at this time. So Rinpoche is saying the main practice he did in prison was this, Tonglen practice. And that Khenpo Munsel gave him what he describes as many special oral instructions that were not in the text. This sounds like a very simple statement, but it's very precious to receive oral instructions from your guru, from your lama. It's not just like going to a lecture and somebody giving you an academic presentation of something. When the guru imparts her or his own wisdom to the disciple through oral instructions. It can be called, I've read sometimes it's called the whispered lineage. It's literally going from the guru's mouth to the disciple's ear. It's very intimate, very direct, very immediate, and very alive. And so when we receive oral instructions from our master, from our guru, from our lama, from our teacher, that's very precious. That is, that's like planting a live seed in our mind that will grow and grow and grow and expand and expand and expand and be of inconceivable benefit to many if you take the oral instructions of the guru and you put them into practice. If you receive the oral instructions of the guru and you do not put them into practice, you wouldn't call them the precious oral instructions. You would call them something like, well, my teacher told me such and wasn't that interesting? The oral instructions of your guru are to be put into practice, and that's what Rinpoche did. He received the oral instructions from his guru, and that was the main practice he did in prison. That's what that first paragraph is telling us. So the conventional way of understanding Tonglen is that we send happiness out and take suffering in. But Rinpoche says, based on his instructions from Khenpo Motsel, for the actual meaning of Tonglen, you have to understand the inseparability of self and other. Well, now, I think we perhaps sitting here together have some understanding now of the inseparability of self and other. Perhaps many of you came in with that understanding to our teachings this weekend, our time together. But perhaps for many, this is also something that is a bit difficult to comprehend. As a concept, perhaps a little inaccessible, and as the direct experience, perhaps not yet directly experienced. Sometimes we have to open the mind to the with words, and then the meditative experience comes later. But the words are very important. We don't leave the intellect behind on the path to full awakening. We don't leave the intellect. We use the intellect. So the speech of the teacher saying, you have to understand the inseparability of self and other. I am so thankful to hear those words. It opens my mind with gratitude that my teacher is going to tell me about the importance of understanding that self and other are inseparable, that we were never two to begin with. Samsara began the moment we thought we were two. And as we continue to think that thought and elaborate it in so many ways, samsara is elaborated in so many ways. That is the origin of samsara, that thought. I, other. I, self, other, not self. But solid like self, but not me, not I. I, other. The teaching that Rinpoche received from Khenpo Motsel and from his many years of practice that he had also before came alive for him in the Tonglen practice as a profound understanding of the meaning of suffering in the context of understanding the inseparability of self and other. Now, you know it's what we've been talking about all weekend, right? I'm sure that you're recognizing that this is not a new topic that we're touching on, but we're touching on it in the context of suffering and the practice that dispels suffering. What a gift. So now Rinpoche is going on to explain what that means, the inseparability of self and other. The ground of our minds is the same. In other words, the ground of my mind and the ground of your mind is the same ground. It's not similar, it's not like, it is the same. It's precise, exact, it is the same ground. That means our minds are inseparable. We can separate them as we think about them and think, well, my mind is clear, that person's mind is cloudy. That's just making something up. The primordial ground is the same, absolute clarity, luminous emptiness, all pervasive with love and compassion, the natural radiance of enlightenment, the natural radiance of emptiness is love, compassion, is bodhicitta. That's the ground of our mind. That's the ground of our mind. And when we talk about this, the absolute, we talk about it as Dharmakaya, the Buddha, the truth body of the Buddha. And then you say, well, where is, love and compassion in that perfect and complete emptiness? It is the natural radiance of emptiness. When the tough hide of appearances is pierced by the arrow of emptiness, what pours forth is the milk of love. That ground of mind, empty, lucent, empty, radiant. That is our ground of mind. Not mine, not yours, ours. Everyone, all beings have that same ground of mind. So, then Rinpoche says, in this context, even if there are many different types of suffering, there's really only one thing called suffering. There is only one suffering. Now that sounds very amazing and maybe inscrutable. How could there be only one suffering when we see so many different experiences of suffering, and even just as the limited one human being that we are, we've suffered so many different kinds of suffering in this one lifetime, and it's a limited palette, but how full it has been of different colors of suffering. So what is meant by the statement, there is only one suffering? If we drop down to the paragraph after that, and just the one following that begins with however, he says, the explication is here, the essence of the suffering of the sentient beings of the three realms and your own suffering is the same. The same essence. That's what's meant by saying the ground of mind is the same, essence is the same. There can be many appearances, but the essence is the same. And then he says, in the preceding paragraph, he says, if there's only one suffering, if that's actually the case, and he says that it is, then when you yourself are experiencing great suffering, let the mind turn to think this way. The minds of the sentient beings and the three realms and my mind have the same ground, and therefore we are non-dual. And our suffering, the essence being the same, if I meditate at that time with that mind, that we are non-dual, all the beings of the realms are non-dual, and our suffering, it has the same essence, then he says, then with that thought in the mind, that clarity in the mind, if we then meditate on our own suffering in the mind's natural state, that suffering goes away. This is a critical pointing out instruction for how to meditate on your own suffering with the understanding in mind that the essence of that suffering is the same as the essence of the suffering of all beings in all realms, because we have the same ground of mind. Our mind's essence is the same, therefore the arising experience of suffering has the same nature for all beings. So when I am meditating on wisdom, when with the wisdom mind, for example, if I'm doing clear awareness practice and I'm allowing mind to be penetrated by the light of clear awareness, which of course you can't prevent it from being penetrated by because it's omnipresent, then in the moment that you are sitting in your meditative work and position, whatever position you're in, and you are turning the mind within to see your own mind, you're turning your mind in to see your own condition of mind, and you, let's say you're the meditator here, you want to lift away the suffering of all sentient beings, and you're aware of your own suffering, because that's what made you sit down that day. So you're looking within to see the suffering, the thoughts, the emotions, the bodily sensations, and the circumstances, everything in your conditioned mind that is at the moment pervaded by suffering, you're looking to see that, and you're looking with clear awareness. You're able to see your mind because you have clear awareness. You're able to see the coming and going of the thoughts because clear awareness sees that. And you are able to see the suffering and its qualities and conditions and movements and comings and goings and changings. And looking with clear awareness, seeing with clear awareness is blending with, mingling with the suffering. And as clear awareness meets the condition of suffering in your mind, the suffering dissolves in clear awareness. And as your mind and the minds of all beings have the same ground essence ground, in that instant, the suffering in the minds of all beings has also lessened. It has diminished as yours has dissolved into clear awareness. It has also diminished the suffering of all those beings who have same mind essence as you, meaning your minds are inseparable. In that moment, your experience of the dissolution of your suffering thought, it may just be one single thought for one instant, the dissolution of that thought lightens the suffering of all beings. As he says, at that moment, you've been able to lessen the suffering of all sentient beings of the three realms all at once. First take their suffering in this way, into the understanding, the wisdom of understanding, the inseparability of self and other, meaning the wisdom of understanding self and other are non-dual. The beginning of dualistic thinking was the experience of self, grasping to self, and the attribution of otherness to the other. That's the beginning of the dualistic mind that we live in samsara. In the moment that you penetrate that with the understanding that the ground of mind is the same, and therefore self and other are inseparable. Self and other actually at that moment cease to be non-dual. You recognize their inseparability. And the ground of mind is one. Their suffering and your suffering are just one suffering. And therefore, as you practice with clear awareness, and clear awareness touches the suffering thought arising in your mind, that suffering thought dissolves. The load is lightened for us all. So he explains, if you understand mind's nature, open, empty, inconceivable, neither ground nor substance, neither center nor circumference. If you understand mind's nature, empty, 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 then you recognize the essence, same essence, of whatever suffering and afflictive emotions there may be, to be emptiness, meaning to be of that same nature. So he's pointing out instruction here is to recognize your own mind's nature, is to also recognize that suffering itself and any afflictive emotions or disturbed thoughts is of that same nature. Open, empty, radiant. Penetrating everywhere, all pervasive in its radiance of purity, ultimate purity, primordial purity, lucent and translucent. And then Rinpoche said, when suffering does not harm you anymore, the mind has great bliss. This is an interesting expression, when suffering does not harm you anymore. We normally speak of being harmed, that the suffering is caused because we have been harmed. We don't necessarily think of suffering as harming us. So what could that mean? That first phrase, when suffering doesn't harm you anymore. How does suffering harm us? We experience pain. Sometimes we're aware that we're being harmed by something, and sometimes the way we recognize that is that it's painful. We recognize that we're in pain. So that's at the bodily level. Pain indicates something has been harmed in the body. When we experience suffering, we may attribute it to an event or somebody's words or to some sorrow from the past. And we think that those are the harms. And the sentence, though, suggests that the harm of suffering is perhaps greater. That it's the harm of suffering that is in the way of our experiencing the great bliss that is the actual taste of emptiness, of the ultimate mind. So suffering, we say, and I've spoken of this in the course of yesterday and today, that samsara began with self-grasping, and so samsara is perpetuated by self-grasping. And self-grasping is this single and only source of all suffering. No matter what the many, many appearances may be, there's only one source of suffering, and that is self-grasping. That erroneous, innocent, erroneous conception of mind. It's a mental conception. And so we can say then that self-grasping, we could actually say, Rinpoche is not saying that in this text, but we, on the basis of what we've just said, we could say that the harm of suffering itself is the perpetuation of self-grasping, or is the continued experience and identification of self that we call self-grasping, the attribution of solidity, of intrinsic existence to something that has not got intrinsic existence. And so that's the harm of suffering, to attribute to it, that it can also have us attribute to the suffering the same solidity we attribute to self, for example. And this is just my interpretation. I haven't discussed this particular phrase with Rinpoche in this way, which I will do now that I'm realizing that it really caught my attention reading it today in a way that it hadn't quite caught my attention before. But we can say that suffering and self-grasping are sawa, same. Without self-grasping, no suffering. Without, in other words, dualistic thinking, no suffering. Inseparability of mind and inseparability of the essence, mind and condition and nature of humans, all beings, all phenomena really. Same, sawa, same. So the inseparability means union. The inseparability of self and other means union of self and other, which means the unborn one nature thereof. Not some two things brought together, but one that was never separate to begin with, but which we have mistakenly created a dualistic mind about. So when suffering does not harm you anymore, meaning is no longer increasing or adding to or perpetuating self-grasping, the mind has great bliss. The mind has great bliss. So I mentioned my friend Taryn yesterday, who was dying and who worked, we worked together while she was dying. And I don't know if I spoke of this aspect or not, but she had extreme pain from her disease as it advanced, and often we're aware that people who are dying, particularly of cancer and other diseases that really attack the the organs of the body, in inner organs, we're aware that much in modern medicine, much attention has been paid in more recent years to methods, particularly drug methods that can get ahead of pain, and so that you can be on a drug regimen that catches the pain before it has become intractable, meaning ungovernable and untreatable and unbearable. This was not possible. Sometimes it's not possible to get ahead of it. Sometimes it's not possible to treat the pain in a way that's efficacious. And this was her experience. The pain was out of control. There was no way to treat it. And at the end, the last 2 days, she and I were not in direct contact. So I don't know what that was like for her. But before that, before the last couple of days, we had been in very regular contact. And her suffering was at two levels. One was and I'm speaking about this because this is a process I was closely observing and being a part of. This is not a unique circumstance, however, and what I'm going to describe and what I'm describing here is really applicable to the experience of many, many, many beings. and not necessarily in that particular circumstance of physical illness. It can also be emotional or mental illness, or it can be, terror in a situation of, of great destruction. And so I'm not focusing on this as being an exclusive example, but I'm using Taryn's experience as an example for us to learn from. So she was in this intractable pain that was not touched ultimately by the medication, and it kept coming day after day. And what made the difference when the medications couldn't touch it? We practiced together on clear awareness. We drew the awareness in to the place of recognizing the inseparability of my mind and her mind therefore with Garchen Rinpoche's mind, and in the context of offering all the experience for the liberation of others, really reaching out to the minds of others who were experiencing suffering and acknowledging suffering having many different varieties of appearance and qualities of experience, but really just praying that by Taryn's suffering, Taryn made this prayer, by my suffering may all beings be freed from suffering. So she gave that suffering for the benefit of all. That is based on understanding that our minds are inseparable, that the ground of mind is the same for all beings. Otherwise, how could giving her suffering have any effect for others? But that's a great generosity practice at the time of death, to give your suffering to liberate the suffering of others. It's an acknowledgement our minds are one. And the pain, the physical pain, gave way to the mental certitude and to the direct experience in mind of mind pervaded by relaxation and a blissful sense as mind recognized the insubstantiality of the physical suffering. That the body was insubstantial was being demonstrated because it was losing its functions one by one. And the mind continued. The mind, she was experiencing directly the insubstantiality of mind, because her mind and my mind, she was in Turkey, I was in Arizona. I mean, so the brains clearly were insubstantial, the mind was insubstantial, all the physical was dissolving, and yet here were the minds touching and having the same experience at the same time in the practice. So then the experience of the dissolution of the suffering, moment to moment. There were moments when the suffering broke through, and then we would again draw the gaze within to see mind as it is, and again, the relaxation that's experienced as bliss. So I can't say that it was stable, but it was persistent. We worked with it persistently, and again, I don't know what happened in the last few days, but to me, it was a great gift to be able to be present with my friend as she demonstrated what Rinpoche is teaching us here. She demonstrated that wisdom in her body and her relationship to the events in her body, because she understood what was happening with the minds. I don't know if I expressed that with the kind of clarity that I experienced it with, and perhaps not, but certainly you're aware of my having had the great privilege of being close to somebody who had the direct experience from time to time of what it is we're talking about here in this way of working with Tonglen. So the suffering, in other words, moment to moment, at moments did no longer harm her. I mean, her experience was a direct experience of no longer being harmed at certain moments by the suffering. It didn't at certain moments precipitate a spasm of self-grasping, which suffering usually does, or often does. At times she was able to relax into the practice, and the practice included giving her suffering for the benefit of others, which is inseparable from taking the suffering of others. Right? So Rinpoche says, when suffering does not harm you anymore, the mind has great bliss. And I experienced that in those brief moments with her. And then, to repeat, if at that time you meditate, making self and others inseparable, that doesn't mean creating inseparability, it means in your mind recognizing the inseparability of self and other. And then that bliss that you experience in that instant, and again, this could be, as it was for Taran, it could be, now I experience it, now I'm overwhelmed. Now I experience it again, now I'm overwhelmed with pain again. It can be like that. That's all right. That's walking the knife edge. If at that time you meditate, making self and others inseparable, then that bliss, however instantaneous it may be, can diminish the self-grasping of all sentient beings. It can lessen their self-grasping. The happiness that is being given is the bliss that comes from the practice of giving and taking. So that bliss is the relaxation of the death grip we have on the false notion of self. The bliss is apparent. The bliss is always available. It's in us. The bliss is a part of who we are. We don't even experience it because we've got a death grip on self-grasping. We're just holding it on. We're holding on to it for dear life, thinking that's who and what we are, but it's not. We are beyond all grasping. We are beyond all suffering, as we are beyond all grasping. And he says, this is how you should practice. So, I agree. This is how I want to practice. I want to practice on truth. I want to practice on the inseparability of all beings, because our ground is the same. We are of the same essence nature. I want to practice on love as the radiance of that nature that we all are. And I want to have articulated this in a way that makes it possible and powerful and irresistible to you to practice also. To realize that when we are experiencing the oneness of suffering because of the oneness of mind, at that moment suffering ceases because the clear awareness has pervaded mind. That is a reason to sit on the cushion, whether you're doing it physically or metaphorically. I think it's excellent, particularly at the beginning, to sit, to practice meditative disciplines, to take teachings and to practice them, and to, very, very important, read the biographies of the great beings of this and other spiritual traditions who've actually achieved full realization. I think this is wonderful that we have this capacity, that we have the written word, we have the spoken word, and we have the naturally arising wisdom, because it is our own access to wisdom that all of this is for. I think to sit and practice and study in order to attain peace of mind for oneself is really important. It's the noble first intention, really, because we do have to start with ourselves. But let the aspiration never be limited to the benefit for yourself, or even the benefit of those you know and care about. Let the aspiration for your practice, for your study, for your contemplation, for your meditation, bring your aspiration as high as you possibly can, and as wide as you possibly can, and as deep as you possibly can. The effectiveness, the efficaciousness, the benefit of your aspiration and your actions of good, the benefit of them depends on how vast and profound your aspiration actually is. Motivation is everything in the Dharma. Actually, it's everything, even if you're not in the Dharma. But for us who are Dharma practitioners, our motivation is key. It's absolutely everything. If your intention is of love and compassion and kindness, your actions and speech for others will be of benefit. If your intention is just for yourself and those you care about, the benefit will be limited to those you care about and yourself. If you're benefiting in your mind, if your intention is to benefit all beings presently in the world, then your vast intention will make the benefit of your activities and your mind very vast and profound. And if you're benefiting in your intention, all beings of all worlds and all times, vaster still becomes the benefit of your actions of body, speech, and mind. So let your aspiration lead you to the destination that is not an ending, but a recognition of beginning, essentially, because the destination is that we reside again in our original state. We've never been separate from it, and I and you have never been separate from each other, because that original state is ours. We share that. We both arise from that. Let your aspiration be like the sky. No beginning and no ending, no limits. Let your love be like the sun, radiant everywhere, spontaneously radiant, naturally radiant, because it's of the nature of your true mind to be radiant, not because somebody needs it in that little crevice. Everyone needs it all the time. The rays of the sun are impartial. And let your compassion be fierce and tender like the Great Mother. Hold nothing back from loving and caring about sentient beings. And I take that a little way further. I aspire that we should love and care about all phenomena and all situations and all circumstances at all times. Not just beings whom we call sentient beings, but everything everyone, every circumstance, every condition, in every moment. I aspire that you and I will love beyond all limits, all appearances which we can name as arising from suffering because they arise in the dual mind. Let's love even the dual mind. Its origin is innocence. You know, you've never heard coming from my mouth the word evil. I don't think that way. Every now and then I think an action might be qualified like that, but never does that thought stay in my mind very long. So, and I remember when I was 9 years old, my mother told me a truth that I want to share with you. She was a very wise woman. She would never have said that about herself, but she was. She's also the funniest human being I've ever met. Very funny person. I was born in 1940. The war ended. The Second World War ended in 1945. So I was a child in the Second World War in the United States, but I was a curious child, so I knew a little bit about what was going on. And when I was 9, I found books in my parents' library that were about events of the Second World War and what caused it and who participated and what their thinking was and so on. And I remember going to my mother and saying, how could this be? How is it possible that this could be? This terrible activity taken by human beings against one another. How could this be? And she said, well, it shouldn't be, but it was and still is because of the word hate and the fact that that word points to. She said it is the most dangerous word in the English language or its equivalent in any other language. So she basically was saying to me, if the word hate has a place in your mind, you have the potential to cause harm also. That was her teaching for me. That's the power of a thought, the power of a concept. In the mind that knows no self and other, the word hate would never arise. Purification, as we touched on earlier, is to sweep away all that obscures from our direct experience and recognition the true nature of all reality. Purification also has the power to uproot the disease of what I call dominance disorder, which is predicated on hatred. The manifestations of that are everywhere. But I want to end on this note. I just want to read you, this is about suffering. It's very directly comes from my having had the extraordinary opportunity to study closely with His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche. And when I was writing the book, my commentary on the 37 Bodhisattva practices, I at one point really lost confidence in my ability to do justice to what I was trying to accomplish at his request. And he gave me a good a good slap in the mind and said, thinking of not doing this is self-grasping, which is really the one thing I needed to hear. But about, and this is just a little excerpt from the book, and it's just so close in my heart that it has arisen because of Rinpoche's teaching on Tonglen. The suffering is like an illusion, as are we, never solid to begin with. The experience of suffering is universal. The details of suffering are endless. The nature of suffering is empty. When illusory practitioner vows to liberate illusory beings from illusion of suffering, absolute love pervades space-like emptiness, expressing as illusory bodhisattva, performing illusion of practice for illusory condition of suffering. In the purity of the three spheres, the illusion, never having arisen, dissolves in an instant. The great secret of Tonglen practice is just this. The great love, bodhicitta, reveals no self, no other, no suffering. Now you know the secret. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that some of these words have entered your mind, carrying on the grace wave of our teachers' great love. Sunandi tam chazipani, tonenye pedanam pamchete, chigana chimalon trupai, si petzole drowarasho. Chanchub semchub ripoche, ma kepanam kejuchi, kepanyam pamepaya, gone gondu pelvara. See you again in 2 hours, and we'll see each other. Some of us, anyway, the ones who come to the Zoom session. Everybody come to the Zoom session so we can see each other. I love you. And in that, we know inseparability, yes? Thank you.